Welcome back, folks, to another episode of Free Mind Podcast. I am your host, Dave Hurt, as always, and we've got a pretty good show lined up tonight. So, solo episode, just me, no guest, but plenty of news, plenty of stuff to talk through, and I guess have a one-sided discussion since I can't hear you guys reply, but I definitely want you to think about what I'm talking about. So, first off, you guys know the whole Kyle Rittenhouse thing is still going down. They are still deliberating in the jury. This was day 3, and some news broke later in the day today. It turns out an MSNBC journalist was caught following the bus that was transporting the jury. Apparently, they ran a red light and got a ticket, and then I guess they were found out or whatever, but now the judge has banned MSNBC from the courtroom, from covering the trial in the courtroom. So that's pretty epic stuff. I mean, and rightfully so. This guy was stalking basically the jury, ran a red light, trying to keep up with the bus that was transporting them. You know, it's craziness, absolute madness. So this is from the Washington Post. The headline is Rittenhouse Judge Bars MSNBC from Courtroom After Report That Producer Followed the Jury Bus. And it's funny, I was looking on Twitter and everybody's like, oh, where's your source? Where's your source? And folks are like, from the mouth of the judge. So that right there just shows you people aren't actually following the trial and you know, they're reactionary. But yes, the judge actually addressed this. There's plenty of footage of it out there now where he's like given the summary of everything that happened. It was an MSNBC reporter or journalist or whatever you would call it. I guess a producer. It was a producer, whatever the distinction is there. And now MSNBC is not allowed in the courtroom. Crazy. So this is from the Washington Post. Judge Bruce Schroeder said the man identified himself to police as, quote, James J. Morrison. He claimed to be a producer for MSNBC, acting on instructions from a New York-based producer to follow the bus. So at first I was like, this guy might just be saying that or whatever, but no, MSNBC confirmed, in fact, that was their guy. So, yeah, they are not allowed back in. So that's interesting. Kind of juicy news there. Not really something that normally happens. So this just speaks, though, to the ethics of journalism. And it seems that this is something that comes up every show because it's so pervasive. But here you go. Once again, a journalist or producer or whatever that person's title was, but they were affiliated with a news outlet. And they're doing something they know they shouldn't be doing, all right? They're following the jurors. It's just very frustrating, man. These people have no ethics. They're crooked. Let's see if there's anything else in this article from the Washington Post. Yep, so kind of the final quote from the judge here. I don't know what the ultimate truth of it is, but it would go without much thinking that someone who is following a jury bus, that is a very serious matter and will be referred to the proper authorities for further action. So this is a big no-no, apparently, guys. Don't do this if you're a journalist or reporter or producer. Don't follow the jurors. So that happened. What else here? Speaking of Kyle Rittenhouse, and speaking of unethical, and speaking of just garbage people, Chelsea Handler put out a tweet, and, there I go, saying, again. Man, that is like my go-to filler when I have a pause. Got to stop that. I'm going to get better. Chelsea Handler put out a tweet retweeting an article from the Chicago Sun-Times. The headline talks about how the judge allowed Kyle Rittenhouse to draw slips of paper to determine who the jurors would be and to determine who would be dismissed as alternates. Now, this is actually a process that this particular judge has used for years. In fact, it started with a black defendant, and he just wanted to make sure that it was fairly and randomly chosen, and that because of race or anything like that, that certain jurors weren't precluded or included or anything like that. So it actually is his process. He's done it that way, and he does it in good faith, and he does it for a very good reason. However, of course, people are twisting this to say that, of course, this judge is a racist, terrible white supremacist because he has the jurors selected randomly by the defendant, pulling slips of paper. And he literally does this in the name of fairness. But anyway, they're going to do what they're going to do. And so the Chicago Sun-Times has a headline describing this, and Chelsea Handler, the beacon of rational intellectual greatness, says in her retweet, "Only the best treatment for white supremacists in America." So here we go again, people. These uninformed, ignorant dum-dums who preach to the world having done no research, okay? Zero evidence this kid's a white supremacist whatsoever. He shot 3 white guys, and here we have Chelsea Handler just casually calling him a white supremacist while this kid is on trial. His life is in the balance here for defending himself, and then you have dum-dums like this saying that he's a white supremacist. And even the premise is wrong, because this process the judge uses is not unfair. And it's not, I mean, he does it for every single defendant, black, white, whatever. Has nothing to do with Kyle's race. It has nothing to do with white supremacy. But yet again, celebrity virtue signalers are going to celebrity virtue signal, as misinformed as they are. Now, in response to this tweet, and I love this, gadsat, who I believe he's an evolutionary psychologist, very outspoken, very intelligent professor, and he's very much a voice against this woke intersectional ideology and fanaticism centered around sort of leftist ideals and wokeness and all this crap. So he replies to Chelsea's tweet, and I'll read it verbatim here. "It is difficult to imagine that someone could be so self-assured about their grotesque idiocy. How is he a white supremacist, and how is this a manifestation of, quote, best treatment? What an imbecile you are." I'll retweet. From gadsat, who, by the way, is, I believe, from Lebanon, not a white guy. So that was interesting and very, what's the word, satisfying to read. Then there's another response here, and I love these just short, terse responses. "A white guy shooting white guys is white supremacy? Question mark. And then, of course, there's a bunch of responses to that in both directions. You know, a lot of people are saying that he's still a white supremacist because insert some ridiculous, circuitous, like circular frickin' reasoning. He's not. All right. There's no evidence to support it. I'm not going to belabor this point. I went over it yesterday. But yet again, here we have another large, high-profile celebrity who doesn't have 2 brain cells to rub together, apparently, just spouting off about how he's a white supremacist. Thank you, gadsat, for what you do. You are a gift to humanity. Okay, other stuff in the news. So, Zac Stacy. You guys may have seen this video circulating now. I wanted to talk about this because I've talked a lot about masculinity on various episodes. And in fact, this podcast started originally as a project aimed at examining masculinity in the modern era. And something I talk about a lot is the fact that toxic masculinity is often conflated with really traits that embody insecurities, not masculinity at all. And a lot of times what you see in men that gets labeled toxic masculinity is really has nothing to do with masculinity. That's not a trait that I would consider a masculine trait. And in fact, it's quite the opposite. It comes from insecurities. It comes from instability, a lack of confidence, all kinds of things, which, ironically enough, this whole movement in opposition to masculinity writ large kind of feeds these characteristics. And so you see more and more of this, which when you really think about it, kind of makes sense. But anyway, Zac Stacy, former running back, I believe, from the Jets, former NFL player. There's this video, and it's hard to watch. I mean, this guy is pure garbage, the worst type of human, piece of shit, weak ass piece of shit. Throwing, hitting, beating his, I believe, wife, at least the mother of his child at that time, punching her, throwing her across the room into a flat screen TV, and then slamming her into a baby's toy table, making the table break, and you hear her just, please stop, just please stop. And I don't know the scenario surrounding it. I don't care. There is absolutely no reason whatsoever to treat a woman that way. And I wanted to talk about it because a lot of times stuff like this is brought up in an argument talking about how toxic masculinity is, and it leads to behavior like this. This is not masculinity. This is a bitch. This is an insecure little boy who has some deep-seated feelings of insecurity and lack of confidence that cause him to do this to a woman. And I don't care if he's an NFL player or whatever. He can hold a ball and run and dodge tackles. Good for him. I could not fucking care less. He is a pansy-ass little bitch for doing this to a woman. That is not masculinity. Don't conflate those things. That is not toxic masculinity. That is insecurity, lack of self-confidence, lack of morals, lack of ethics, really just being a piece of human garbage. So that's what I have to say about Zac Stacy. You guys can look up the video. It's really hard to watch if you have a heart. And he should be ashamed of himself. I hope he gets the worst of it, because what an utter piece of trash. Okay, I was hanging out thinking about what I was going to talk about earlier, and it occurred to me that we stopped hearing about these Beagles that Fauci had funded research on, where they allowed sandflies to, allegedly eat the skin off their faces, right? And this was a big deal. This was like everywhere for a couple days maybe, and then it just kind of disappeared. It kind of fizzled out, which is really how things go with the news cycle. Our attention spans are inches long, right? And I was just curious, what are the updates on that? So I did a little bit of digging, and I did find some info here just to kind of update you guys. This is from back on November 2nd. It's November 18th now. But the article is from factcheck.org. Now, granted, these fact checkers, you've got to be very careful with these guys. A lot of subjectivity going on, a lot of bias, a lot of one-sided analyses. But anyway, this is titled Answering Questions About #BeagleGate. So really the question is, did we fund, or did Anthony Fauci via the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease, or NIAID, did he fund these experiments on beagles, which I believe took place in Tunisia, if I'm not mistaken. I'll double check that. But anyway, there's a long, full answer here, and I encourage you guys to check it out. But basically, what it comes down to is the paper that was published on this study, where they show the procedure that they carried out, sticking the beagles' heads in these, I guess you would call them mesh boxes, and allowing the sandflies to do their thing. And they did have cordectomies, which is their vocal cords are removed so they can't squeal in pain. This all happened. And the contention now is whether or not Anthony Fauci via the NIAID funded it, right? So in this fact check, it says that the original study, the paper that was published, it does cite as one of its funders the NIAID. Now, here's where it's kind of weird, okay? After all of this came out and all the backlash started to happen in public, mysteriously, the NIAID disappeared from that paper listed as one of the funding sources online. Now, the timing is incredibly fishy, right? It's not sure I buy it, but apparently the authors of the paper somehow accidentally put that Anthony Fauci's organization funded their research. Now, that is a bit of a stretch to accidentally just put an entirely unrelated institution in the list of your funders of your research. And so it seems to me as though they were asked to take it off after everything blew up. But of course, this fact check says, yes, it may have said originally that the NIAID funded the research in the actual publication by these scientists. However, it turns out that they didn't, and so they've taken it off the publication. Now, you guys know as well as I do that all that requires is really just someone reaching out to them being like, hey, we need you to do us a favor and take us off of this paper. However, that said, we have absolutely, and it even talks about this in the fact check, so credit to them. It does talk about the fact that we have funded other research like this in the past through the NIAID. So essentially, Fauci's not off the hook for this. I mean, nothing has changed essentially, in my opinion. Whether you believe they do kind of the same language games with this that he's tried to do with Rand Paul, excuse me, where he says that there's no evidence that the gain-of-function research that he funded in Wuhan led to COVID or SARS-CoV-2, which is, of course, not the accusation that Rand Paul is levying against him whatsoever. And kind of the same deal here. They're saying, well, they didn't fund the study that is depicted in that picture, even though they were listed as a funding source on that study. They're kind of playing the same game where they're like, well, actually, we didn't do that one. And they kind of leave it open. So it's all semantics. It's word games. This guy's crooked. I don't believe for a second that we're not funding this type of research. And this is coming from someone who applied for research grants with federal agencies and did research through federal agencies. So I know a little bit about this world, okay? I was not experimenting on puppies, for the record. I was doing very boring functional genomic analysis, looking at gene expression. So that's that. The Beagle saga does not die. We shouldn't let it die, and hopefully they continue to look into this because it seems like it's very real. And speaking of Fauci, I think it was today, he actually said, and most of us are over COVID. We're just over it, man. We're living our lives. We couldn't care less. I'm in South Carolina where, there are people wearing masks and stuff randomly here and there, but for the most part, we are just living normal life. We're doing great. We're doing fine, as is Florida, as is Texas, as are a bunch of states. We're trying to move past COVID, man. We truly are as a people. We're over it. We have bigger fish to fry. We have a lot of issues right now with the economy and inflation. And the list goes on and on and on. But Fauci is now saying that we can, quote, return to normalcy if we get below 10,000 cases a day nationwide, and preferably down to like 3,300. Now, if these numbers don't mean anything to you, let me put that in perspective. We haven't had 10,000 cases per day since the beginning of the pandemic, like March of 2020. Have they been that low? So, he's pushing the goalpost. Same thing he did with herd immunity. It's 60%. Oh, it's 70%. Oh, it's 80%. It's 90%. Actually, it'd be ideal if it was 98%, 99%. He's milking this thing for all he can. Fauci doesn't want COVID to die, and it's odd. It's truly odd because it seems like there's non-trivial evidence that he could have potentially been a part of causing it. So, I don't know. Take that for what you guys want. It's weird. But yeah, he said 10,000 cases and we can return to normalcy. I got news for you, man. We have returned to normalcy for the most part in most places. There are some holdouts. There are some crazy people that live in fear and don't understand science and don't read objective sources and diversify their consumption of information and live in a bubble. But yeah, most of us, we're not afraid of this thing. We know that it's going to be here to stay for the most part. like the flu. We're going to have to deal with it. Get in shape, strengthen your immune system, have a plan, or take the vaccine. I don't care. But Fauci just does not want to let it die. And this might be a little conspiratorial, but it is a bit coincidental that he's now setting this low bar for returning to normalcy, or high bar, however you look at it. It's a big achievement to get down to that number. And it coincides with when Pfizer is releasing their new antiviral treatment for the drug. So it sounds a little bit like justification for pushing this out to the masses. And we have spent, the federal government rather, has spent our money, billions and billions of dollars, buying this new antiviral from Pfizer. So it's a little coincidental that we pay Pfizer all this money for this new drug, and now we're saying that we can't return to normal until we get to levels as low as the beginning of the pandemic, when most experts are saying, look, we're not eradicating COVID. We're not getting to pre-pandemic levels. It's just not happening. It's an endemic disease. However, that paradigm doesn't sell a lot of antiviral meds. At least, just one way to look at it, I guess. However, I think if people get COVID, they're going to get the treatment. So I don't know. Who knows? That's just me thinking out loud. So anyway, that's happening. Anthony Fauci's off his rocker. He doesn't want COVID to end. He's just moving that goalpost as fast as he can. All right. Lastly here, the ongoing saga with Alec Baldwin. I've covered him a little bit. We've talked about him some on the show. This is not going away. There is a lawsuit now against him where the script supervisor filed a lawsuit saying that he intentionally fired the deadly shot. Okay. Yeah. Script supervisor. She's filing a lawsuit. This is from the New York Post. She's saying that the scene did not require shooting a gun at all. There's a very strict regulation on set, or rule on set, that you never point a gun directly at someone and pull the trigger. And so she kind of outlines all these things. And it's looking more and more like he did this on purpose. Not that he killed her on purpose, but he knowingly pointed a gun and pulled the trigger, on purpose, despite being told not to, despite having rules in opposition to that, despite crew walking off set, citing how dangerous it was, having all of these misfires and stuff that had already happened. And by the way, it was a single shot revolver. Okay. So what that means is you have to pull the hammer back and then pull the trigger. So he went through that entire motion while pointing it directly at this cinematographer and pulled the trigger. And this is why she has this lawsuit against him. So she describes it here, and this is a quote in the New York Post. "I was holding my script in my left hand and had taken out my iPhone and opened up my photos to check the continuity on his shirt and vest. Then an explosion, a deafening loud gunshot. I was stunned. I heard someone moaning, and I turned around, and my director was falling backwards and holding his upper body. And I turned around toward Alec and saw Halyna going down to the left of me." So she has hired Gloria Allred. Her name is Mamie Mitchell, and she is suing over this. There's a lawsuit saying that Alec Baldwin did this intentionally. He broke all kinds of protocols and procedures. And I'm kind of leaning towards believing it when you look at all the evidence. So here's another quote from her, and this is what I was alluding to earlier. In the suit, Mitchell claimed, quote, "Alec Baldwin intentionally, without just cause or excuse, cocked and fired a loaded gun, even though the upcoming scene to be filmed did not call for the cocking and firing of a firearm." She also said, "Every safety protocol designed to ensure safety with a firearm on set was ignored, such as the presence of live ammunition on set." We've talked about that before. "And that actions that were taken that day were against all industry norms." Now, this might have a little something to do with why a bunch of crew had already walked off set. So anyway, it continues. I think there's a good amount of culpability here. And I think there's going to be, as there should be, a lot of heat on Alec Baldwin over this. It seems like at least manslaughter. I mean, he defied rules. He cocked and shot a gun for no reason. There was no reason to be doing that. And that's the way it's looking. So here's another article, and this is from CNN Entertainment. So see, you guys, I pull from all kinds of sources here. And this was just kind of hilarious, honestly, because his brother, Alec Baldwin's brother, Daniel Baldwin, says that Alec is only the target of blame in this because of his political beliefs, because of his stance on guns. Okay, yeah, he's a target of blame in this only because of that. Not because he's the dude who pointed the gun, pulled the trigger, shot the girl, and killed her. Definitely doesn't have anything to do with that. Completely has everything to do with the dude's politics and his stance on guns. Give me a break. Give me a break. And that's why I wanted to read this, because it's just so hilarious. And, of course, CNN would publish something like this. Yeah, they're just blaming him because of his politics, man. Has nothing to do with the fact that he actually is the one who shot the gun and killed the girl. It's just outrageous. So here's a quote from him. Alec has no blame in this at all. Wow. Imagine the nerve. Your brother has shot and killed someone, and you're going to say publicly that he has no blame in it at all. I mean, he violated every rule of firearm safety, so there's a little bit of blame right there. The armorer is responsible for the weapons. The actor is an idiot. That's an interesting take. The protocol exonerates Alec of any responsibility at all. The first AD should have witnessed an empty weapon being handed to him or fired the gun himself. I don't know what caused him to announce cold weapon on set. That announcement alone exonerates Alec of any wrongdoing or any responsibility. So basically he's saying that the AD said that it was a cold gun. I don't know if there's any footage of this or anything like that, so who knows? This could be all hearsay, but apparently he's saying that because of that, Alec has no responsibility to make sure that the gun's not loaded. However, that notwithstanding, as was just outlined in this lawsuit by the script supervisor, they had a very strict rule, as is, I guess, the industry norm. You never point, even these guns, prop guns or whatever you want to call them, or guns that are supposed to have blanks in them, you still don't point them directly at people. And that's exactly what Alec did. So even if you take into account this information and say, okay, fine, they told him it was a cold gun. He didn't check, but they told him, so he trusted them. He still pointed it directly at a human and pulled the hammer back and then pulled the trigger. So, and it's even more, I think, what's the word I want to use here? It's worse when you consider the fact that it's a revolver. You can generally see rounds in the chamber. So, that's where this stands. I really think he's in for it, man. I think there's some non-trivial evidence that he did this on purpose. And again, when I say did this on purpose, I don't mean killed her on purpose. I mean he knowingly pointed a gun at someone, pulled the hammer back, pulled the trigger, and knew he wasn't supposed to do that. So there is some culpability here. Anyway, that's what I got tonight from what's going on in the world. Just as a recap, MSNBC is banned from the Rittenhouse case. Zac Stacy is not an example of masculinity gone awry or toxic masculinity. He is an example of an insecure beta male who's a punk ass. Chelsea Handler is a fool, doesn't do any research, and has attacked and labeled Kyle Rittenhouse based off of absolutely zero information, and I hope that he sues her for defamation. Fauci, it looks like, did in fact fund torture on Beagles, despite fact-checking attempts and despite the efforts of the primary investigators on this study to remove the NIAID after the news broke about them funding this research. So we need to keep pursuing that. If you're listening and you are, I don't know, in the news, a journalist, whatever, keep digging. Lastly, Alec Baldwin. looks like may have intentionally shot this lady. So a lot went down today, pretty much like every day. There's always plenty to talk about, but that's all I got for you guys. I have coming up this weekend, I'm going to be sitting down and recording an episode with a buddy here at the gym who is a defense attorney, a trial attorney, and he's going to break down the entire Rittenhouse trial for us. We're going to discuss it, so that should be a really cool episode. I'm looking forward to that. Hopefully by then we have a verdict or at least a mistrial with prejudice, something from this trial that we can discuss, kind of looking at it from beginning to end and talking about where the prosecution did a good job, not a lot. The defense did a good job. The jury intimidation that went down, all kinds of stuff. So a lot to talk about in this case. So that'll be recording on Saturday, and then I'll probably have it up a day after that. So that's happening this weekend. And if you're watching the video version, you can see that I'm wearing our new Free Mind t-shirts. So those are going to be dropping soon. And please, 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 if you want to support the show, if you like what we stand for and what we're doing here, pick up a t-shirt. It's a good-looking shirt. Got the American flag on the sleeve, Free Mind across the front, and then on the back, it has the logo for my apparel, Just Work, also my lifestyle and coaching company. And, so we'll be dropping these along with a couple other designs, and I will post more information about that soon. I believe that is all. Follow the show on Instagram at The Free Mind Podcast. Follow me on Twitter at I am Dave Hurt. And if you want to get the hookup on some supplements, go to firstform.com/hurt and get them shipped for free, USPS priority. And until next time, I guess that's it. So keep your minds free.